recorded.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is Kayla Berry with Quasi. I'm a Communications and Outreach Specialist, and I just want to say hello and thank you for joining us for the second to last Cyberseminar of the fall series. We appreciate you attending today. Presentation today from John Selker, but at the moment I would also like to say thank you to Adam Ward, our host of Fall Cyberseminar Series, and with that I will let Adam introduce John today.
Well, thank you very much, Kayla, and for those who are just joining us, please do go ahead and either hit mute on your phones or go ahead and press *6. That'll mute you so we cut down on the background noise today. With that, I'm really pleased to introduce John Selker, the fourth speaker in our series this fall. John's background is a bachelor's degree in physics from Reed College. His master's of science and PhD degrees are in agricultural engineering from Cornell University. And after a brief postdoc, he has been at the Oregon State University in the Department of Biological and Ecological Engineering Science. John is one of the 6 editors at Water Resources Research, really a prolific publisher in vadose-zone hydrology and all things related, I would say, as I looked through his CV in preparation. And the real reason that we invited John here today is about 5.5 years ago, John gave a talk called How We Will Make Hydrological Measurements, really focused on sort of the role of measurements and technology in the transformative nature of this field. And so with this, we asked that John maybe take a look backwards and see how well he did at those predictions and give us sort of another visionary talk about what we'll see in the next 5 years. So with that, I'll turn things over to John. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, Adam. It's really great to be here, and preparing this talk was a pleasure indeed to think back on what has changed and what hasn't, and what we've learned over the course of it. One of the things I want to emphasize as we get going here is that Kawasi is your organization. It's the organization of the entire community. And kind of to quote Kennedy, ask not what Kawasi did for you in the last 10 years, but ask what you want to see happen with your community in the next 10 years. And so really the idea here is to throw the ball into the community's court again and say, hey, wow, you know, what should we be doing, and what's worked and what doesn't, and what are the characteristics of things that do work. And we will, of course, be a little bit true to the title and talk a little wireless sensing in the cloud. But we've added a little bit here about we're trying to award the Mr. Nerdsville Prize for 2012. And the question is it George Jetson or Dick Tracy who gets the Nerdsville Award? I will say that anyone who's still on the line, I see there are people who have stuck with it so far, your first slide, 90-word count, which if that doesn't convince you that this is going to be tough sledding, well, just wait and see. But anyway, thanks a lot for joining. Let's see what we have to say. Now, the progress in science, it goes almost without saying, but it's worth repeating, that techniques are often foundational for coming up with new discoveries. And so we really have to be mindful of that when we are planning our own work, and particularly when we're planning to work as a community. Because those decisions we make about what techniques we invest in and what techniques we employ are likely to have a very big impact on our discovery. And one of the things that I'll emphasize today is that it's not a one-way thing. It's not that techniques simply fall from the sky. Rather, that we adopt technologies and push technologies, and we'll talk a little more about that when we get towards the fiber optics part of the conversation. Now, I am counting on you, and it's a little bit unusual in this seminar series that I am asking that you are interactive. And I'm going to keep an eye on the chat window, and you can unmute your phone at any time and throw ideas on. So I want you to think, I want you to ask questions, and I want you ultimately to think of volunteering. And I also want you to go ahead and hit *6 if you have background noise. Someone does. The things I want you to start chewing on as we head into this conversation is things such as, does it make sense that an iPhone costs about the same as a soil moisture probe, just the probe? Think about the technologies involved. And what are the implications of that being true? How did that come to be, and how do we make use of our understanding of this seeming contradiction. Which is more remarkable and reliable? Getting into your car by pushing a button that you've never changed the batteries on in a decade, or the fact that your lab hot plate is stopped stirring? So there is a lot to be learned by when we get into technology, about technology that does work and technology that doesn't work, and why it comes to be that way. And I want to stimulate your thinking about that as well. And then I ask this question, and I don't know if I'm like dating myself, but there was the Jetsons, which was a little cartoon show, and then there was Dick Tracy, who was a guy, who was a detective who would always look at his wristwatch. And the question is, why doesn't the world look like the Jetsons had expected, and why does it look like Dick Tracy expected? And you can see that in the lower right, those of you who are good at reading upside down, the answers are provided. I didn't want to make them feel like they were left out here. And I want to just get to a few of my conclusions first, because I think it's good for you to be thinking about these things as you see the presentation. Now, for decades, and those of you who are new to the field perhaps haven't heard this, but for decades there was this mantra that was repeated so often: we are a data-limited science. We don't, we don't have the measurements. We're really, our ability to understand this field is limited by our ability to collect data. And one of the questions is that still really true? Can we change that? Has it already changed? Looking at things such as the COASI HIS program and Water ML2, which is the markup language for water data, we are really getting to a place where the free interchange of data is going to be, I think, happening very, very soon. And not just small amounts of data, but large amounts of data. So I think that the mantra will need to change. We have all sorts of affordable and efficient and reliable sensing platforms that are available. The other thing that I'm going to make this case for is that the global cellular phone market has utterly changed the face of our science. We now have the ability to do real-time landscape level sensing. We also happen to have remote hilltops that are fully provided with power. We haven't taken advantage of that opportunity, but the fact that people spent an inordinate amount of money to make this technology available brought with it some amazing opportunities that are aside from just the phone service itself. And then I'm going to make the case that there's hardware that we can leverage, and that this is a fundamental feature of the Jetson versus Tracy quandary, which I'm sure will be the lead to many publications on the Jetson-Tracy conundrum from here on out. Now, one of the questions I want you to start thinking about, and I still don't see any chat, so that's kind of a good thing. I'm putting this one question out here right now, is should COASI lead a community call for free cellular data transfer? If you think about it, the amount of data that comes off a typical weather station is of the order of a megabyte a month. And 1,000 weather stations, therefore, could be handled by on the order of a gigabyte a month. Now, this is effectively zero if you're AT&T. Think about the PR and the tax benefits to AT&T or any other company for taking on such an opportunity. How would this come about? Is it going to come about by John Selker pestering AT&T? Unlikely. But we have the power of a community behind us. What's that mean? I think that we may not have fully exercised the opportunity that we created for ourselves. And in so doing, we have not made good use of the resources that the NSF gave us. So I think this is partially a call for us to think harder about what we do as a community and how we organize ourselves. Jim Kirchner has done some really cool work, and a lot of it was driven by high-resolution measurement in time. That increase in frequency allowed him and others now to make fundamental realizations about the plumbing of landscapes. And so Kirchner, like Benner before, really points to the fact that if we can make new measurements, we can really fundamentally change how the world looks to us. And that's really one of our key things that we want to do as scientists in this field. Now, as Adam mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I've had the opportunity to be editor of WRR, which will be completing my term in March. Through the last 4 years, I've read around 2,000 papers. And I suppose that gives you a little bit of, well, first off, lost sleep, but also you start to see patterns about what distinguishes a phenomenal paper. And basically, great ideas are linked at the hip with amazing data sets. I don't want to put one before the other. Typically, an amazing data set was motivated by a great idea. You know, you had this idea and you made a very strategic set of measurements. Typically, it's not the amount of data that's important. It's strategically how you're looking at those data. So the combination of a new idea and a strategically taken data set is typically what leads to a breakthrough paper. Where does that amazing data come from? Well, typical characteristics that we see is it spans scales, either in time or space. We're going to talk a little about what we call DTS, distributed temperature sensing, which has provided one example of how to span time and space. Again, we do have someone who ought to press *6. That might be John Dowd, Jonathan Pollock, Cynthia Dinwindle, or Dave Stonestrom. So go ahead and try to hit *6 if you have that chance. Okay, so the other thing that I think is a fundamental, as we mentioned before, transformative opportunity would be the power of what's in your pockets. Cell phones win. And the point is, and we're going to talk about this, and I'll repeat this point, leveraging technology is what made Dick Tracy successful. We have created from scratch very little technology for our science. We have always been opportunistically taking advantage of sensors that were developed for other purposes, almost all of them. Cell phones are a multi-trillion-dollar industry that has generated a set of technology that just happens to coincide extraordinarily well with some of our needs. And so that thing that's in your pocket is an opportunity that doesn't just fall off the truck every day. Now, all that said, I don't want you at the end of this thing to say, okay, what technology do I pick up? Fresh ideas are rare, and it merits time to develop them. You can't think too much. I hear far too little kind of dreamy-eyed discussion of real basic science issues in our field compared to very pragmatic stuff about how to get funding and how to take the next data set on a particular process. I really want you to think. I want to implore that everyone takes the time with their students and themselves, if you are students, that's fine, just to actually sit quietly and say, is this idea really new? What is it we don't understand? Obviously, it involves thinking. It also involves understanding the literature. I think Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe put it best some years ago at the Kwasi meeting in Boulder, when he said that he tells his graduate students to be ready always, at all times, with 3 great questions, just in case God happens to knock on his office door. Because if you don't have the 3 questions, you'll have missed the opportunity to get the answers. And I think the point is that really, when it comes down to it, good science almost universally follows from good questions. Okay. So, questions to think about. And again, comments are welcome. That's seriously not how you should pronounce my name. I'm sorry, Cynthia. Dinwiddie? I'm sorry. Perhaps, yeah, sorry about the mispronunciation there. So a few things to think about. Are we taking advantage of the cell telecom opportunity? Is it acceptable that we are living in a time when the greatest global experiment is going on and we are not taking advantage of that system adequately? I think that we could say that that's not acceptable. Do we have an organization that's positioned to change this? I say, yeah, we do, and it's Kwasi, I think. And I think it's quite exciting that we've taken the effort to do that and put this in place. Is this a grand challenge? In my opinion, absolutely. You know, we had a lot of discussion about grand challenges in science, and I claim that this is one. The grand challenge is to organize ourselves so that we do measure the changes that are currently going on. These are once in an Earth cycle changes. Certainly once in the history of humanity will they occur. And so it would be a tremendous shame, and it would be an opportunity missed that future generations would probably have very little understanding for if we were to not take advantage of this opportunity. Okay. So now this George Jetson versus Dick Tracy. We have seen techno faceplants. And for those of you who don't ski, a faceplant is when your skis stop and your body doesn't, and generally you end up with your face in the snow. There's been lots of things, and I don't know, we could bicker about this over beer, whether waterbeds, El Caminos, car hop restaurants, and convertible roller skate shoes, but not, were really faceplants. Interestingly, the Heelys, which are shown at the right, that little shoe with the wheel in the back, those are still quite popular. And what that points to a little bit is the difference between the convertible roller skate shoes, which came out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They were trying them and never were successful, but the Heelys took off. And this we're going to talk about with respect to evolution to a synergy threshold. Other things that I think have been faceplants, and this is a little bit, I think, building on what Kamini presented last week, is this concept of a common man's geophysics. And I consider these to be the $50,000 to $100,000 startup fund failures of so common with new faculty. How many dusty electromagnetic induction EM31s are sitting in closets? How many ground-penetrating radars like SIR-10s are stuffed into the recesses of some sort of laboratory? How many proton precession magnetometers are sitting out there? What does that mean? Why have those not generally been successful? I think also, and those fall into the category, in my opinion, of things that are complicated. So one of the strategic issues that we have to address as a community is how do we deal with complicated instrumentation? And really that was an issue that CWASI was created to address. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more later in the talk as well. University, the flume thing, these big flumes, there are some that are being productive, don't get me wrong, but it is extremely common that flumes sit and gather dust. Again, they look good to lots of people in the catalog, but we always have to look at what is the new opportunity for scientific discovery. Flumes are wonderful for teaching, and of late, in the hyperetic community, they've been shown to be very useful for discovery as well, which is a real transformation. But just because something looks good in the catalog and just because it would be nifty to have does not mean that it will necessarily lead to scientific breakthroughs. So looking again at technology, the Palm Pilot versus the iPhone. And this is what I consider to be, the Palm Pilot, although it was a lovely device and I used them at times, has had none of the impact that the iPhone did. And what I consider this to point out are two things. Number one, technologies evolve. They don't just kind of fall from heaven. So we can often trace back a technology to when it was not useful yet. And then when it becomes sufficiently, it resolves sufficiently many of the technical challenges, I call that achieving a synergy threshold, all of a sudden it explodes and becomes something that everyone can use. And so what that means is, okay, we understand a little bit about the evolution of technology. We also understand that to get too early into a technology is probably a mistake. You need to identify when a technology is sufficiently mature for your efforts. That goes back to this dusty EM31s line, because that threshold between when it is going to be useful to you and when not is really a function of your level of expertise and your research focus. If you're a gadget guy, then getting on a new gadget early and helping push it forward is in the evolutionary stage. That's when your excitement occurs. If you're a hydrology guy, then you want to get some data about hydrologic processes, and you probably don't care to be the guinea pig on which a new technology is tested. Okay. And let's talk about another kind of characteristic issue with technologies is when a technology really solves the fundamental problem. We could see the opportunity presented by satellite phones, but what became clear immediately was that the battery required to communicate to a satellite was much larger than would fit in a pocket, and this was a showstopper. So watch out again. When you look at a technology, make sure that it is mature enough and it has the right features and right characteristics to solve your problem. Okay. Now, I think a really interesting case study is that of self-organizing networks. This, in fact, though it is not commonly recognized, self-organizing networks of radios were used at least as early as the late 60s and early 70s in the Vietnam War. It turns out that Motorola developed airplane deployable sensors that would relay acoustic data between the sensors back to a base station so they could listen to jungles. And so it's not that self-organizing networks have not been successful and have not been around for quite a long time. And certainly the literature is replete with examples starting as early as 1990 of smart dust sort of ideas. And they were put forward in this, for instance, this article by Martinez et al. As environmental sensing networks. As this could be our big opportunity for environmental sensing. Now, the trick was to go out and try it. And so I think Trubilowitz and Cynthia, I'm guessing I'm going to have email from Trubilowitz as well, et al., working out of Marcus Weiler's lab, published one of the first papers in our literature, certainly in WRR, about the application of these smart dust systems based on TinyOS as an operating system, which is really the ZigBee kind of framework. And what they found was they were able to get some decent data, and I'll show a little bit of what they got, but fundamentally it didn't work very well. Fundamentally, equipment that worked in the lab with TinyOS didn't work in the field, and large elements of their data set were not actually collected by their system. Up in the upper left here, I'm showing their measurements of through-fall and soil moisture and how they relate, which is nifty. So these are data that show that they were able to occasionally get some useful stuff. But what you see in Table 3 of their paper is that the soil moisture sensors, for example, in some days had data transfer efficiencies of a tenth or a hundredth of a percent. Similarly with humidity. So what we find is that it worked a lot of the time, but it certainly didn't work all the time. And the question is, would you accept this from Campbell Scientific? Would you accept this if you're reading an article, you're a reviewer of an article, and you see just major gaps in data? And I guess the answer is no, and the point is that it's one thing to be excited about developing TinyOS and this wonderful opportunity of distributed sensing. It's quite another to base a research program on it. This, at least back in the time of this article, which was in 2006 when published, or was it 2008, excuse me, I think we could argue that the technology was not mature. Now then, Branko Kirkes et al. In California with Roger Bales and the team did a much more intensive effort at using TinyOS-based systems for a self-organizing wireless network for monitoring hydrologic processes in a forest. And so what you see here in the lower right are these little hexagonal things. Those are your sensors. And all the circles are what are called repeater nodes. Those are the jumps that are given to this network so that it can communicate across throughout its whole network. What do you see? That's 600 meters wide, roughly, and you've got just oodles and wads of nodes required to make a sustainable communication system. The point being that, number one, this whole notion of kind of a node every 2 kilometers, which some of these systems advertise themselves as, is nowhere near the case, certainly not in a forested system. And secondly, that in the hands of experts, certain things are possible that are not possible in the hands of people who are primarily hydrologists. The probability of good transmission of data here was near 1. The dropout times, you can see that using different paths here, they're showing different paths on the lower left, and you can see that that for the bulk of the time they were able, using path A, to get very, very reliable communication. Not perfect. So knowing this, of course, then if you were an electrical engineer, you will design the system to have redundant data storage. That is to say, it'll store data on the node so that if it has a failure, it spits it out later. I need to point out that that's not the case in all such systems. Speaking of such a system, we look at this one, the EKO system. Now, this is a commercially available system, which might lead one to think that, boy, this is really going to be something that's going to work robustly. So we took this out into this lovely field here, which you can see in the lower left, a photo. And this is how containerized nurseries are irrigated. Now, one thing we can point out is that there's a lot of gravel there and not much green. So you look at the percentage of that area covered by the top of a bucket with a plant in it, it's pretty small. So this is not the most efficient irrigation system ever. And one of the things we were trying to do is help them get a little bit more efficient. And we thought that using these wireless sensors, we'd be able to detect the conditions in different locations and give them real-time feedback. And this company, which was Crossbow and then became Memsic, has been around for a long time, and this came out of one of the hotbeds of innovation and development of this system. So if you're going to find what should be a reliable system, you look at this and you say, boy, they've refined it, they've put it in a nice package, they've got solar panels, it's all set up, ready to go, should work great. And we're going to use it here in a site that I think is about as good as it gets. This is, on the order of 400 meters in any direction. It's a somewhat concave basin, so there's direct line of sight between the base station and any other node that we have. And so we are, about an order of magnitude better here than one would normally expect performance of these systems to be functional for. And so this system is hard programmed to only put out data every 15 minutes. And so every 15 minutes it's supposed to put out the data and communicate that back to the base station. Now, if you're irrigating and you're detecting the situation, 15 minutes is already pretty coarse because, that's not, if you're only irrigating for 2 hours, your resolution is only about 1/8 of the total duration of irrigation, expected irrigation cycle. So precision irrigation, we'd rather be plus or minus 5%. But worse yet, we found that the number of packets received at 15 minutes was about 8,360 compared to about 1,560, which we finally got after 32 minutes. And then after 45-ish minutes, we got another 285, et cetera. The point is that at the appointed 15-minute interval, we only had 81% efficiency of communication. After half an hour, we had about 96%. And so we really couldn't get what we would call reliable communication until we were after about an hour. Then we had 99.9% after 1 hour. Now, this is simply the way it is. It is a function of the way the Zigbee system and the TinyOS was developed. It's an open source sort of thing. It's really nifty in many fundamental kind of information science aspects in terms of how many different ways it can self-organize. In terms of our field and getting what we consider to be adequate data, it wasn't. And so it's striking, I think, that now essentially 2 decades into this technology, if not 4 decades into it, we're still at this point. Now, that should be contrasted with, I claim, with the other thing. And the other thing, the other way to communicate wirelessly is cell phones. And this is also contrasted with the kind of concept of these complex systems, the complex geophysical systems, or this complex system of self-organizing mesh networks. The cell phone is an everyman system. You simply hit go, it does all the work. So it was designed to work for people as dumb as a brick, that is to me. People like me can actually make it work. And so fairly early on, once this technology became ubiquitous, articles started showing up like this one by Sang et al., where they show the feasibility of cell phone technology for field data acquisition. So who wins, George Jetson or Dick Tracy? Well, personally, I guess I'm leaning towards Dick Tracy. And so what's the difference between George and Dick? Well, one of them is that Dick Tracy was a guy who was kind of a streetwise detective, and he had to actually solve real-world problems. And George Jetson was much more of a dreamy-eyed guy who thought the future could be anything. And I guess the point is that the discrimination between that which will occur and that which could occur is difficult, but also important. And I think that, not to say that the comic strip proves anything, but I think that is a distinction that we need to make. It's easy to make predictions from years ago and think that, for years in the future, I should say, and say, well, everything's lining up. I think you really have to apply much more careful thinking oftentimes. I certainly was figuring that the self-organizing networks would be a very powerful technology as of 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And actually, at the end of the day, I realized that the trillion-dollar gorilla in the room of cell phones is going to be a much more important thing. Now, I want to just introduce a little bit of our work using cell phones, and I want to show a little bit of data and a little bit of the power of having this system. And for those of you interested in African hydrometeorology, I encourage you to look at TAHMO.info, where we describe our Trans-African Hydrometeorological Observatory. It's a project between Oregon State University and Delft University primarily, with other people helping out as well. Our kind of perhaps absurdly ambitious goal is to put 20,000 stations across the continent of Africa. We do now have stations going in this last week in Ghana and in place for several months in Senegal and Kenya, and going into South Africa in the coming weeks. And actually, there's a whole lot of opportunity to participate in this project. It's a very open source sort of effort. You can look at the website. One of the cool things that's going on right now is a sensor design competition. We'll be giving away 20 3D printers to the successful design applicants. We're really trying to get an African flavor on this. So if someone's thinking about joining the sensor design competition, we would almost require, but at least strongly suggest that you have at least a significant student population on the project from Africa. So if you have collaborations in Africa, cool. The basic technology of TAHMO is going to be founded on a cell phone sort of methodology. So let's take a look at what these stations look like. The stations we're using right now are just to get our feet on the ground, are made by Decagon. This is a station being installed in Senegal. And so it's a very classic station. We did a few modifications to make it work for us. One of the things that was all important in Africa was having an energy source that did not require continuous maintenance. So the EM50G shown here requires 5 AA batteries, and they need to be changed approximately every 6 months, depending upon how much energy the cell phone draws. Well, you know how cell phones are. Sometimes if you have a poor signal, they'll draw a lot more energy, and so someone has to keep on top of this. Well, it was all of us recognized that this is a problem. And so we thought, wow, we need to go with a solar option so there's no battery changing. Now we started looking at solar panels, and everyone said, people are going to throw rocks at them, solar panels get stolen, they're attractive, it's never going to work. It's certainly not. And we kind of looked at the thing and we said, you know, what technology can we leverage that would make this normally over $100 effort of making a solar panel with a big lead-acid battery and have the whole thing work? How can we make that something that's more tractable? And once again, it really comes to identifying where we could leverage existing technology. So in the upper left here, you'll see this little solar battery charger, SunPack 800, and it has a lovely little solar panel. It has an 800 milliamp hour lithium-ion battery in it, and it just happens to put out 5.2 volts out of a USB port. Well, if you point that towards the sky, that's plenty of energy to run this entire weather station. So here, for $7, we completely eliminated the need for batteries. And the point is, there's no way for us to make this thing for $7. We would really we had to leverage what the market was doing anyway, and that was the key realization. Let's take a look at a little bit of data from this whole system. Here's the system as it stands. That little stick on the ground was just an installation tool. There's no actual thing on the ground there. There is a probe about 1 meter away at 5 centimeters depth, a soil moisture probe. So here's a typical data set taken from Senegal last night. And what you see in the red circled area in the upper left is the battery voltage. And you say, oh my God, John, you're just skimping by here. This battery's about dead. Actually, it's not. What that is that the system was expecting 6 volts out of 5 AA batteries, and it's only getting 5.2 volts. And its little algorithm says 5.2 volts is a low set of batteries. In fact, it's fine. So here's one place where you might be fooled by the real-time readout. Looking at the very bottom of the graph, you see the rainfall in time. Those are the blue bars. And then the green is the moisture content at 5 centimeters depth, and you can see on the left axis the volumetric water content listed there. And so most of the dynamic range is between 0-ish and 20%, and this does require calibration, as most soil moisture probes do. But one of the, it's quite apparent that the combination of the rain gauge and the soil moisture probe is a really powerful combination in terms of making, first off, having a way to verify that the rain gauge is working, because the soil moisture is so responsive at that depth. And it also is really cool in terms of seeing how the local ecosystem is responding to rainfall. And if you look at the red line, which is right above the green line, there you have the relative humidity, and you can see that when that the soil finally dries out here in the last few days, for example, the relative humidity during the day really drops, okay? So it kind of all adds up. And this is one of the things about these stations, is that we are developing a lot of quality control algorithms which utilize the synergies that are possible by cross-platform and cross-sensor verification, that things make sense, and it's a big deal. So on a typical TAHMO station, we'll have solar radiation, which is the top bar. Well, I might forget what light green is. So the blue is solar radiation, wind speed and direction, temperature, relative humidity, soil moisture, and precipitation. So, and these stations we can make available. If people have projects in Africa, we can make them available at a very low cost. The Kenyan installation was kind of cool, actually. What we did is, it's not WMO compliant insofar as it's more than 2 meters off the ground. There it is at the top of the building there. And you can see, if you look carefully, a little red wire heading to the right-hand black tank. And that is a temperature, pressure, electrical conductivity sensor that's sitting in that big black tank. The big black tank is catching the water off the gutter system from the roof. And so this is a roof water catchment system, and so here the station is kind of doing double duty. It's giving us climatic information, but it's also monitoring the level and the quality of the water in that tank. And here's the data set that came from it. Let's again look at the very bottom of this graph, and you can see the bold blue lines, which are the rainfall events. Now the aqua line, which is the next line up, is the level in the tank. And so the water level is listed there on the right axis as going to a total of as high as 10 meters, obviously, and that the tank actually tops out at about 5 meters, or less than that even. Tank tops out, I think it's 3.5 meters. But what we see is that everything was going fine back in August. It would kind of get a rainstorm, it'd fill up a little bit, then it'd go down a little bit, get another rainstorm, and fill up, come down a little bit. That's all. So that was all very good. Let me see if I can figure out my little tools here. So here's a classic, filling event when it rained and the tank filled up. Here's another classic filling event. And on this day, right about here, I was to write a letter of recommendation for the student. And maybe it was a little bit later than that. And what I saw the water level dropping, and it looked exponential. And I said, we've got a leak here. And I emailed my student, and he said, John, yeah, I've known that for the last few hours. I've been in touch with Kenya already, and they're trying to fix it. Now, the sensor, when it goes to 0, it actually comes out at this very high level as just a kind of an error reading. So you can see a couple of when it went all the way dry, it indicated it with this reading. And the repair people had been working on it, and finally, just about here, they finally were able to repair it. And now, if we look carefully, these last few rainfall events, you can see that, in fact, we are starting to accumulate water again. So the amazing thing here is that we, in real time, are watching what's going on in Africa, and it just allows for a level of attention that otherwise is impossible. These data can't get lost. They're sitting up in the cloud. So no one ever has to go out there to collect the data. No one's going to have them on a hard drive. You're never going to wonder where they are. They are permanently backed up in the cloud. And so it not only gives you real-time data, but it gives you it in a way that is absolutely reliable. So this is a phenomenal thing. And the cost of the cell phone communication is of the order of $1 a month. $1 a month for this whole service. So isn't that remarkable? In the middle of Kenya, we can have this data instantaneously brought to us for $1 a month. Okay, so we're kind of mid-ish talk, a little later in the talk than mid-ish, so we're going to cut, since Steve's going to talk about DTS a lot tomorrow, next week, I won't go into that in too much detail. But what can Hawassi do to promote access to the technology? What about seeking free communication? After all, the airwaves are owned by the community. I think that they are public airwaves, and the cell phone companies are using them, but that doesn't mean that they have the right to hoard them. I think we have an excellent case to be made that for the observation of the globe, that we should be able to leverage the public's allowance of people to use those airwaves. And then I also want to come back to this collaboration thing. You can see, we saw that with the Zigbee system and the self-organizing network, it could be made to work if they worked with absolute experts in the area, and that's what Roger Bale's team did. So we need to think in Hawassi about that. And frankly, we have. And some of the things that have come out of it are CTEMPS, which is the Center for Transformative Environmental Monitoring Programs, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the Geophysics Node, which specifically puts geophysicists in touch with practitioners of hydrology. Okay, so I want to just point out that this isn't, all of our discoveries aren't going to just come out of wireless measurement. Let's go through a really quick discussion of what's possible with other sensors, such as distributed temperature sensing with fiber optics. We've got this nifty center called the Center for Transformative Environmental Monitoring Programs, and we're having a workshop on December 1st and 2nd at Stanford, and you are all welcome to sign up for it. We're going to have food from around the world served. It's going to be a very exciting time to learn about how this distributed temperature sensing works and learn how to analyze and calibrate the systems. The way it works is we shoot light down a fiber and we look at the backscattered light, and it turns out that the side bands of the backscattered light tell us the temperature of the fiber at each location along the fiber. typical fiber optic, what we have to keep in mind is that the light is stuck in the middle of this fiber, and so we have it trapped. And what we're doing is monitoring the temperature of the glass in that core every, let's say, 25 centimeters or so. Where could we use that stuff? Well, we could use it all over the place. I'm going to show you a couple of examples in mine shafts and in lakes and in rivers. So this is Martin Sketzel, who is installing a fiber 1.4 kilometers down a well, a mine shaft in the Czech Republic. And these are the data that came out of it. And what you see is that at the top of the system, this is where the fiber was in air. This is distance, that's 1,400 meters. This is temperature. It gets warmer as you go towards the center of the Earth, so down 1.4 kilometers. It's 30 degrees C, whereas at the top it's on the order of 20. Interestingly, the system goes in big steps, and that's due to what's called double-diffuse convection, which is a process driven by the different diffusion coefficients between salt and temperature. So thermal energy diffuses quickly, salt diffuses slowly, and that gives rise to these large convection cells. And here we just show the ability to resolve very, very slight, subtle changes in temperature. In these data, we're seeing a standard deviation of around 7/1000ths of a degree in terms of the temperature resolution. You can put it in a river. These are Nick van de Giezen is here, and my kids are over here, and we're in Luxembourg. And what you do is you put that in a river, and these are the sorts of data you can get. Here's time going down the vertical axis, so it's about 8 days worth of data, and then distance going to the right down the river. And so you'll see at first dashed line, during the middle of the day, the river heated up as it came down to that point, and then at that very point, about 125 meters down the river, it cooled off. That was because there was a groundwater inflow there. So at the lowest section of this plot, you can see the flux, and right there we inferred an increase in flow in the river, or stream, if you will. And so at each of those, we could do an energy balance at each groundwater inflow to determine the location and the volume of water going into the river. Really cool. Soil moisture. One of the, I think, the holy grails of hydrology is to be able to measure in space and time the water content in the subsurface. Basically what we do is we put a heat pulse down the fiber, and we see the response of the fiber to that energy input. If there's a low change in temperature, that means it's very wet. If the temperature changes a lot with a given amount of energy, that means the soil is dry. Here's a typical pair of heat pulses, and you can see that for the same location when it was dry, the temperature went up in one case by 8 degrees, in the lower case by only about 5 degrees when it was saturated. If we put in for a slightly longer time, we can get a temperature change of 14 degrees versus on the order of, again, just under 6 degrees. So clearly water content, this is no great surprise, but water content has a strong impact on thermal conductivity and thermal heat capacity, both of which tend to damp the ability of the energy to change the temperature. You can calibrate this curve by doing some lab studies, calibrate the change in temperature versus the moisture content. You can go out to a field, install it, and then we can get extraordinarily high resolution in time and space information at different depths. Here we're showing 30 and 60 centimeters depth of the water content in this field. So I believe that this is going to be a transformative, it has been a transformative technology, as predicted, I think, correctly 4 years ago. You can do it in a wetland by putting in a longer pulse of energy. What happens is if there's flow, then that flowing water strips away that thermal energy. So in other words, the delta T you see in the upper right is smaller as there's more flow, so in a saturated system. And here is the expression for the velocity as a function of the observed change in temperature that you measured with the DTS, which is showing up right here, and then a bunch of other numbers like the Prandtl number and things like that. And what you can do then is install this set of cables into a wetland and watch the temperature response. Here you see this big divot in the temperature response, which means that there's high water flow, which would correspond to this point here. So what we can do is we can measure in time and space the local fluxes in water in this wetland, which is pretty exciting. We can also go into lakes, and here we went to the Dead Sea, put vertical cables, in this case, a very high-resolution cable. This cable it has fiber optic wrapped around in a helical pattern, so it gives us data every few centimeters. And then we can watch the development in time and space of the thermocline in the Dead Sea, and in fact figure out what's going on with the, again, salt fingering off the bottom of the thermocline in the Dead Sea. Some pretty exciting stuff. So drawing it together then, I think I wanted to have you keep thinking about evolution of technologies and when to take advantage of a new technology, when it has got to the synergistic level. Leverage technologies, and I think that Dick Tracy is the winner today. Collaboration is key. Don't lose your science in the web of wire and modems. You need to take advantage of expertise of your buddies. And that's going to really, I think you'll see more and more that the great contributors to our science are those who really know how and when to collaborate. Strategy matters, and I think that COASI is an amazingly powerful tool which we need to use much more deftly than we have thus far. We have this incredible resource that we built, and I think that we need to really make it happen. One of the things that COASI has certainly made possible is CTEMS. And it's here for you today. You can get your own expert and a DTS. So we send out technicians to the field with you. We've got people flying all over the world doing this fiber optics work to help people get the results they need. We have a system off of Tahiti right now. We have one in Antarctica. We have one in the Dead Sea. We've got one in Oklahoma. We have one in Colorado. And I think there's one maybe in Washington State. They are all over the place. People are using our service, and you should too. So we have the tools, I claim, to monitor the greatest experiment ever run on Earth, but we've not yet deployed them, and I say that's our fault. So thanks again for your attention today. I guess maybe I didn't leave as much room for real-time conversation as I would have liked to, but I really look forward to hearing your thoughts and conversing with you here in the next few minutes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John. This is Adam Ward again, and one of the big drawbacks of the Cyberseminar series is that it's difficult for everyone to express their applause. But I think that was a really great talk, taking us through maybe some of the advances that we've seen in the last few years that are transformative in some of the future directions. So I think, John, what I'll ask our participants to do is maybe try to type their questions into the chat box. And I'll have you just sort of keep an eye on that and try to address them in the order that they come in. Does that sound reasonable?
Sounds great. Oh, thanks very much, David. And one of the things I want to, I was using this talk today. I think we need to be mindful of the fact that not every talk is supposed to present like the latest and greatest science. Sometimes we really have to think about how we organize ourselves, and that's really what today was about from my perspective. I think that someone else was typing away. So I'm curious, Kayla, what's your reaction to the call that we should that COASI is not leveraged to the point it should?
Well, we're definitely here to support the community. So if we get feedback from your presentation today and interest in it, it's definitely something that we should be able to help out with and support. I think it's a good opportunity that we haven't necessarily pursued as of yet.
Yeah. And is really the power consumption is a function of rainfall. Yeah. Okay. And Todd, that Israeli study is actually very closely mirroring a lot of work that's been going on for quite some time in Holland as well. And yes, it is a cool opportunistic thing about cell phone networks that the stations, when they relay information between each other, between stations, they track the intensity of the signal received. And so by tracking the intensity of that signal, you can get the amount of attenuation, and the attenuation is primarily due to rainfall. So indeed, there's a really cool opportunity. That said, the newest cell phone networks are getting rid of those microwave links, and they're going to fiber optic links. So it's not a growing opportunity necessarily, but it is an important one, and the folks in Holland at least are saying that it's going to be one that sticks around for quite some time, even as these fiber optics get installed. But yeah, very cool opportunity. What is it just having $1 a month cell phone service? Well, politics. The pricing, just like drugs are in this country, are extremely expensive. The pricing, and there's a lot of discussion of how cell phone pricing works. But the bottom line is, we all know that the marginal cost for another megabyte is essentially zero. And so I think that with any political pressure at all, particularly if we demonstrate that we're not threatening the primary commercial market, I think that we can take advantage of this. But yeah, there's lots of things restricting it now, and we won't deal with those. And Steve says that cheap cell phone data plans in the U.S. are vital, and I completely agree, and I think they are within our reach. And again, I really think that that if Kawasi got organized, we might be able to organize that, get that possible. We also see that certain companies, such as Decagon, have negotiated special contract prices with cell phone providers, and they've come up with some very low prices themselves. So in the interim, don't be stymied waiting for the world to change. You can work with people who have received low prices, find out how to piggyback on those. Ying says, can data from fiber optic cables be put into WaterML format? And this is a very good question. And last time I asked David Maidment, the answer was still not quite yet. I mean, clearly there'd be some kludges that one could do, but the tricky thing is that WaterML has yet to deal well, as far as I know, with transect data, where you have dense data on a series of adjacent points. And so when we have dense data, we're talking about every 25 centimeters, and we might be getting data every second, every 25 centimeters. So it works out to terabytes in the worst of cases. So far as I know, not great support yet from WaterML, but I think that is in the offing. Okay, David Stonstrom says, can you expand on the power to remote hilltops? Are these cell phone towers? Yeah, the point here is that to run a cell phone tower takes power. And so what we see in many of these places are installed power systems in very remote locations. And I certainly see that throughout Africa, and I see that throughout the high basin west. And so one imagines that either some of those have hardwire, some of them are solar. Those that have hardwire, that's another opportunity where I'd really like to work with the phone companies to be able to get access to that power, because despite my nifty little $7 solar panel, power is often a real limitation, and it's a very problematic component. Dave Goodrich, can you, Kawasi, provide input to the FCC spectrum hearings to make the case? Interestingly, there is a scientist here at Oregon State who follows these things, Nick Toffolaro, and I don't know if Nick's on the phone today, but I think we may be able to. I do think that we're a small enough player, and it's a big enough set of gorillas in the ring that it'd be hard to get our voices heard in the full fray. I think we need to be, again, strategic. And Rick and I have been exchanging a few phone emails on this, so I'm not sure we want to jump into the whole spectrum hearings, but maybe there's a more strategic way to go. Any ideas are welcome. Am I familiar with cell-based systems other than Decagon that are functioning on the African continent? Yeah, well, indeed, there is a small company called SensorScope, which I worked with many years ago in Switzerland, and I know that they have a set of systems in Burkina Faso that are functioning. In terms of a commercial kind of market, let's see. Yeah, and then Syngenta, which is a large agricultural provider, they have a series of weather stations based on cell phones as well that they've implemented, having bought cell phone rights with Safaricom. So yeah, there are a few others at least that are going on. I'm not familiar with all of them. Do you have a ballpark price for individual installations for the heated subsurface yeah. Okay. So the heated fiber optic cables are running us right now about $6 a meter for the actual cable with the copper bearing kind of outside to do the heating. The instruments can be kind of expensive. However, C-Temps, your friendly C-Temps, has the full heating systems, which are remotely controllable. It's all, you can do it from the comfort of your own desk. So we have the heating controllers, and we have the DTSs that you can get anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 a month. You can write into your grants. So the cables, I would count on, let's say, $6 a meter, and then the instruments, if you buy them by yourself, you're talking about $75,000, I would suppose, for really good stuff. But if you rent them from us, it's on the order of, let's say, $5,000 a month, roughly speaking. And with, by the way, discounts available for graduate students. So if there's ever a graduate student, we have a pilot program where they get the stuff almost free. Let's see, Kevin Smith asks, do you have a ballpark price for individual installations? No, maybe that's one I just answered. Yeah. And so Jim Brock, hi Jim, as sensor networks proliferate, it becomes critical the QA of data. Yeah, oh my goodness, are you right, Jim? You know, garbage in, garbage out, there's a lot of garbage data out there, and that's one of the reasons that TAHMO is really focused on this synergistic evaluation of inter-network data. So why are we going to put 20,000 stations out there? Because we want a lot of redundancy. We know that the African environment is very harsh, and you need to be able to double and triple check all your data against itself. And so Jim's absolutely right that the QA/QC stuff, number one, it's critical. Number two, the cool thing is there's a lot of researchable questions. And so I'm working with Tom Dietrich, who's an artificial intelligence specialist for data recognition and data quality. And the open questions are amazing. And we could actually become quite in a leadership role because I think that industry didn't really recognize the opportunity as well as it could have, and they just put in redundant sensors and then had sensors fail. And I really have yet to see great work on kind of smart implementation of redundant sensing, which I think is going to be just super cool stuff. So yeah, I agree. It's critical, and also presents some really exciting research opportunities. I know we're running a little late here. I see that we don't have any current questions. So I don't want to jump ahead here, Andy, Adam, and Kayla, but you know, those of you who do need to leave, really appreciate you guys taking the time today, and I hope it was valuable. And you know, we're here to help out however we can. And as a community, again, I want to make the plea that you guys are part of Kawasi, and that we've got an incredible tool that I think that we still need to push hard on to be able to bring our community to do the things that have to be done.
Yeah, well, thank you very much again, John. I think if anyone out there has any more questions, please go ahead and get those typed into the chat box pretty quickly here.
I'm willing to hang out here too, so no rush. I just don't want to have people waiting indefinitely.
Well, we'll keep that open for just a minute. And John, I wanted to just thank you again for you know, a talk that's really got, I hope, a lot of us thinking about the idea of the one or two measurements we make at an individual place, and the ways that our research could expand if we could make those measurements at many places, and in a more cohesive network, even as a community of researchers. So really a nice sort of visionary look at where some of our technologies are going in the future. So thank you again.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Adam.
And let me just chime in, John. This is Kayla. I also want to thank you for a great presentation. And I just want to remind everyone who's still on the line that if there was something in the talk today that you want to review, we do record these presentations, and this presentation will be posted to Quasi's Cyberseminar page next week, so you can always go back and rewatch the presentation if you have any questions. You know, you can always email John, myself, or even Adam with questions regarding this presentation or other instrumentation questions, which John presented today.
Yep.
All right. Well, I guess seeing no other questions, we'll let you off. John. Oh.
Do we get another question? question? Wait. No, I think we're still at the same. I don't see any. Maybe I didn't scroll down. Is there more scrolling down to be done?
No.
I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, John, again, for a wonderful talk today.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care then. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Goodbye.